At our 7-year anniversary dinner, my husband Patrick stood up and announced to the entire restaurant that I was a worthless deadbeat who spent my days making pointless videos on my computer while he worked his ass off to support us. When I calmly handed him the envelope I'd been saving for this exact moment, his smug smile vanished as he read the 6-figure check inside, and my announcement about what I planned to do with that money left the entire dining room in stunned silence. The clink of Patrick's wine glass against his knife echoed through Romano's Italian bistro like a death knell. Our anniversary dinner. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. What I now know was meant to be my public execution had been carefully orchestrated. Patrick had chosen the restaurant's most visible table, the one directly in the center of the dining room, where every conversation could be overheard. His parents, Dorothy and Eric Dunbar, sat across from us with barely concealed anticipation, like vultures waiting for roadkill. "I'd like to make a toast," Patrick announced loudly, his voice carrying that particular tone he used when he wanted maximum attention. The surrounding tables turned to look exactly as he'd planned. His mother Dorothy adjusted her pearl necklace with a satisfied smirk, while his father Eric leaned back in his chair, with the expression of a man about to watch his favorite show. "To my wife, Ella," Patrick continued, raising his glass higher. 7 years of marriage to a woman who thinks making silly little videos on her computer counts as a career. A few diners chuckled uncomfortably. 7 years of supporting a deadbeat who spends my hard-earned money while contributing absolutely nothing to our household. The words hit me like physical blows, but I remained perfectly still. I'd been expecting this moment for weeks, ever since I'd discovered Patrick's plan through an overheard phone conversation with his mother. What they didn't know was that I'd been preparing for this moment too. "Here's to finally accepting that some people are just worthless," Patrick concluded with theatrical flair, "and to making decisions based on reality instead of false hope." Dorothy actually applauded. Eric raised his glass with a cruel smile. Several nearby diners looked mortified by the public humiliation they were witnessing, but Patrick seemed to feed off their discomfort. He'd always loved an audience for his cruelty. That's when I stood up. The restaurant fell silent as I reached into my purse and withdrew a cream-colored envelope. My hands were steady, despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. Patrick's expression shifted from triumphant to confused as I placed the envelope directly in front of him. "Open it," I said calmly, my voice carrying clearly in the hushed dining room. For 7 years Patrick had dismissed my work as a hobby. Every morning he'd roll his eyes as I set up my camera equipment in our kitchen. "Playing with your little computer again," he'd sneer before leaving for his job at the insurance company. When I tried to share my excitement about sponsorship deals or brand partnerships, he'd wave me off with patronizing comments about internet nonsense and fake money. He had no idea that my cooking and lifestyle blog, Ella's Everyday Magic, had grown from a small personal project into a multi-6-figure business. While he saw worthless videos, my 2.3 million subscribers saw authentic recipes, cleaning hacks, and homemaking tips that had transformed their daily lives. Major brands paid me more for a single sponsored post than Patrick made in 3 months. But Patrick lived in his own reality, where real work happened in offices, and real money came from traditional jobs. He'd never bothered to look at my bank statements or ask serious questions about the packages that arrived daily for product testing. When I upgraded our kitchen equipment, he assumed it was frivolous spending of his money. When I worked late editing videos, he complained about the computer noise keeping him awake. The irony was devastating. While he called me worthless, I was quietly building something that could support us both comfortably. While he accused me of contributing nothing, I was actually earning more than enough to leave him entirely. 3 weeks earlier, I'd come home early from filming at a local restaurant to find Patrick on the phone in his study. The door was cracked open, and his voice carried clearly down the hallway. "Mom, I'm telling you, the anniversary dinner is the perfect opportunity," he was saying. Public enough to really drive the point home, but classy enough that she can't make a scene. I froze in the hallway, my heart pounding. "She needs to understand her place," Dorothy's voice crackled through the speakerphone. 7 years of indulging this computer nonsense has gone on long enough. It's time she got a real job or accepted that she's simply not capable of contributing to the marriage. The humiliation will be good for her, Eric's voice added. Sometimes people need a wake-up call about reality. Patrick laughed, actually laughed, at the idea of publicly humiliating his wife. She'll be devastated, but it needs to happen. I can't keep pretending her little videos matter. The guys at work are starting to ask questions about why I'm supporting a deadbeat. That word deadbeat hit me like a physical blow. But what came next was worse. After the dinner, we'll give her an ultimatum, Patrick continued. Get a real job within 30 days or sign a postnuptial agreement that protects my assets when this marriage inevitably fails. The casual way he discussed the end of our marriage, the cold calculation behind their plan, the sheer cruelty of wanting to break me down publicly, it crystallized something inside me. They wanted to show me my worth. Perfect. I'd show them exactly what I was worth. As Patrick's fingers fumbled with the envelope's seal, I could see the confusion and growing concern in his eyes. This wasn't part of his script. The surrounding diners leaned forward slightly, sensing that whatever was happening wasn't the typical anniversary celebration they'd expected to witness. Inside the envelope was a single piece of paper, a bank deposit slip from my business account showing my income for the previous month. The number was larger than Patrick's annual salary. Below it I'd written a simple note: "This is what worthless looks like. I'll be using this month's earnings to pay for the best divorce attorney in the city." Patrick's face went through a series of expressions as he processed what he was seeing. Confusion gave way to disbelief, then to a dawning horror as the implications sank in. His mother leaned over to peek at the paper, and I watched her face drain of color. "What is this?" Patrick whispered, his voice hoarse. "That," I said clearly, ensuring everyone in the restaurant could hear, "is my monthly income from those silly little videos you've been mocking for 7 years. Turns out, contributing nothing to our household actually means I've been financially supporting us both without you even realizing it." The silence that followed was deafening. Patrick stared at the numbers as if they might change if he looked hard enough. Dorothy's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. Eric's smug expression had completely evaporated. "Impossible," Patrick stammered. "This has to be fake. You can't possibly make more money than you." I finished calmly. "Patrick, I've been making more money than you for the past 4 years. The difference is, I never felt the need to humiliate you about it in public." The weight of their miscalculation was settling over the table like a suffocating blanket. They'd planned my destruction, but they'd built their strategy on a foundation of complete ignorance about who I actually was and what I'd accomplished. Looking around the restaurant at the stunned faces, I realized this moment represented more than just personal vindication. It was about every person who'd ever been dismissed, underestimated, or told their dreams were worthless by people who couldn't see beyond their own limited perspectives. The real show was just beginning. To understand how we arrived at that devastating moment in Romano's, you need to know what Patrick and I used to be, or at least what I thought we were. 7 years earlier, I was Ella Morgan, a recent culinary school graduate, working 60-hour weeks at a high-end restaurant in downtown Seattle, dreaming of opening my own place someday. Patrick Reed was a junior insurance adjuster with ambitious plans, and a smile that could make me forget how exhausted I was after a brutal dinner service. We met at a mutual friend's barbecue, one of those rare Sunday afternoons when I wasn't working. I was standing by the grill, critiquing the host's technique under my breath when Patrick appeared beside me with 2 beers and a grin. "You look like someone who knows their way around a kitchen," he said, handing me a bottle. "Please tell me you're going to save us from whatever culinary disaster is happening over there." I laughed despite myself. "The meat's been over direct heat for too long. Give it 5 more minutes and it'll be leather." "See, I knew it," Patrick said with mock triumph. "You're the expert. I'm Patrick, and I have absolutely no cooking skills whatsoever, but I'm an excellent appreciative audience." There was something disarming about his honesty. Most men I met either tried to compete with my culinary knowledge or dismissed it entirely. Patrick seemed genuinely impressed by my expertise, asking thoughtful questions about flavor profiles and cooking techniques. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. When I mentioned my dream of eventually starting a food blog to share recipes and cooking tips, he encouraged it enthusiastically. "You should totally do that," he said, his eyes lighting up. "You have this way of explaining things that makes it sound achievable, not intimidating. People would love that." Those early days were intoxicating. Patrick would show up at the restaurant after my shifts with takeout from places he'd researched specifically because he wanted to try different cuisines with me. He'd listen for hours as I talked about my plans for the future, nodding along as I described my vision for a blog that would make home cooking accessible to everyone. "You're going to change how people think about food," he told me one night, as we sat in his apartment, sharing Thai food and planning my content strategy. "I can already see it." When I finally launched Ella's Everyday Magic 6 months into our relationship, Patrick was my biggest cheerleader. He helped me film my first few videos, holding lights and offering suggestions for camera angles. He shared every post on his social media, proud to show off his girlfriend's talents to anyone who would listen. "My girlfriend is going to be famous," he'd tell his friends, showing them my videos with genuine excitement. "She's building something amazing." The blog started small, naturally. A few dozen subscribers, mostly friends and family members being polite, but I was determined, posting 3 times a week with recipes, cooking tips, and household hacks I'd learned from years in professional kitchens. Patrick celebrated every milestone with me: our first 100 subscribers, our first 1,000, the first time a recipe went viral. "I told you," he said, when my apple cinnamon rolls video hit 50,000 views. "People can see how special you are." We got married 2 years later, in a small ceremony that I planned and catered myself, much to the delight of our guests. Patrick's parents, Dorothy and Eric Dunbar, attended with polite smiles, though I noticed Dorothy's tendency to refer to my work as Ella's little cooking hobby even then. Eric was more direct in his skepticism. "It's nice that she enjoys cooking," he told Patrick during the reception, not bothering to lower his voice. "But eventually she'll need to focus on building a real career." Patrick had defended me that night. "Dad, you should see the numbers her blog is pulling. This isn't just a hobby anymore." But something had already begun to shift. As my subscriber count grew into the 6 figures and brand partnerships started bringing in real money, Patrick's enthusiasm began to wane. The supportive boyfriend who'd held my camera was gradually replaced by a husband who seemed annoyed by my success rather than proud of it. "You're always working," he started complaining during our 2nd year of marriage. "Can't you just enjoy being married without constantly filming everything?" I tried to explain that consistency was crucial for building an audience, that the partnerships I was developing required regular content creation. But Patrick had stopped listening the way he used to. His responses became increasingly dismissive, peppered with comments about internet people and fake careers. The real turning point came when my income surpassed his for the first time. I'd been excited to share the news, thinking he'd be proud of what we'd built together. Instead, his reaction was cold and strange. "That can't be sustainable," he said flatly, when I showed him the numbers. "It's BS. Internet stuff is all bubbles and crashes. You can't base a real life on something so unstable." "Patrick, this is real," I insisted. "I've got contracts with major brands, a literary agent interested in a cookbook deal, speaking engagements at food conferences. This isn't going anywhere." But he'd already made up his mind about what my work was worth. Over the following months, Patrick began openly dismissing my achievements. When I was featured in a major cooking magazine, he shrugged and said print media was dying anyway. When a Food Network producer reached out about a potential show, he rolled his eyes and muttered about people who sell out for 15 minutes of fame. His parents' influence grew stronger during this period. Dorothy would make pointed comments about real jobs and stable careers whenever we visited. Eric would lecture me about the importance of contributing to a household in meaningful ways, as if my growing income wasn't contribution enough. "You know what I respect about Patrick?" Eric said during one particularly painful family dinner. "He goes to an office, does honest work, and brings home a real paycheck. That's what builds a solid marriage." I looked to Patrick for support, but he just nodded along with his father's assessment. The man who'd once celebrated my video going viral now sat silently while his parents diminished everything I'd accomplished. The final blow to our early relationship came when Patrick started actively undermining my work. He'd interrupt filming sessions by turning on the TV at full volume or starting phone conversations in the next room. When I explained that I needed quiet for audio recording, he'd complain that I was being controlling and prioritizing strangers on the internet over my own husband. "This is our home too," he'd say. When I asked him to keep it down during filming, "I shouldn't have to tiptoe around your little projects." The dismissive language became constant. My little projects, my computer time, my internet friends. Each phrase was designed to minimize and diminish. When brands started sending products for review, sometimes packages worth hundreds of dollars, Patrick would roll his eyes and mutter about free junk cluttering up the house. But the cruelest cut was how he'd positioned himself as the marriage's sole financial provider, despite the evidence mounting around him that I was earning substantial income. He took credit for our improved lifestyle, the renovated kitchen, the upgraded camera equipment I'd purchased for better content quality. "I work my ass off to give us a good life," he'd tell his friends, conveniently ignoring that my income had been supplementing and eventually exceeding his for years. By year 5 of our marriage, Patrick had completely rewritten our history. In his version, I was a supported wife with expensive hobbies, not a successful entrepreneur. He genuinely seemed to believe that my substantial monthly deposits were somehow play money rather than legitimate business income. Looking back now, I can see how carefully his family had coached this transformation. They'd systematically eroded his respect for my work and his understanding of its value. But at the time, all I knew was that the man who'd once called me special now treated me like a burden he was generous enough to carry. The change in Patrick's behavior wasn't immediate. It was gradual, like watching paint fade in the sun. By our 6th year of marriage, the transformation was complete, but it had happened so slowly that I'd adapted to each new level of dismissal without recognizing the pattern. That changed one Tuesday morning in March, when I witnessed something that shattered my remaining illusions about my husband's character. I was in our home office, editing a sponsored video for a major kitchenware brand, when I heard Patrick on the phone in the living room. He was speaking louder than usual, his voice carrying that performative quality he used when he wanted to impress someone. I paused my editing, something about his tone setting off alarm bells. "No, seriously, Mark, you wouldn't believe what I have to deal with," Patrick was saying. "She sits in that room all day, talking to a camera like she's some kind of celebrity. It's honestly embarrassing." My blood ran cold. Mark was Patrick's college friend who'd recently started visiting more often, and I'd noticed how Patrick's behavior toward me became noticeably worse whenever Mark was around. "The worst part is, she actually thinks it's a real job," Patrick continued, with a laugh that felt like ice in my veins. "She'll show me these numbers on her computer screen like they mean something. I'm like, honey, playing with a camera isn't going to pay our mortgage." I set down my headphones carefully, my hands beginning to shake. The video I'd been editing was for a partnership worth more than Patrick made in 3 months, money that had indeed been helping pay our mortgage for years. "Oh, it gets better," Patrick went on, clearly enjoying himself. "She wants to write a cookbook now, can you imagine? Like anyone's going to buy recipes from some random housewife with a camera. I keep telling her she needs to get a real job, but she's so delusional about this internet stuff." The casual cruelty in his voice was devastating, but what came next was worse. "The funniest part is how she thinks those companies actually care about her. They send her free stuff, and she acts like she's running some kind of business empire. I don't have the heart to tell her it's basically charity. Companies probably have quotas for working with small-time bloggers to look inclusive." Mark's laughter echoed through the phone speaker, and I felt something fundamental break inside me. Patrick wasn't just dismissing my work, he was actively mocking it, turning my achievements into entertainment for his friends. "How do you stand it?" Mark asked. "Honestly, I've been thinking about that a lot lately," Patrick said, his voice dropping slightly. "My parents keep asking when she's going to grow up and contribute something meaningful to the marriage. Dad says I'm enabling her by not putting my foot down." There it was. The influence I'd been sensing for years finally spoken aloud. Dorothy and Eric weren't just disapproving observers, they were actively coaching Patrick to undermine me. "What are you going to do?" Mark pressed. "I'm working on it," Patrick replied cryptically. "Our anniversary is coming up, and I think it's time for some real talk about expectations and reality." The phrase sent chills down my spine. Real talk was Patrick's euphemism for the lectures he'd started giving me about my unrealistic expectations and need to face reality about my career prospects. I sat frozen in my office chair as the conversation moved on to other topics. The editing software hummed quietly on my screen, showing footage of me demonstrating knife techniques for a video that would be seen by hundreds of thousands of people and generate thousands of dollars in revenue. But in Patrick's reality, I was a delusional housewife playing with toys while he generously supported my fantasy. That afternoon, I did something I'd never done before. I looked up my business account statements and added up my annual earnings. The number that appeared on my calculator made me stare at the screen for a full minute. I was earning more than double Patrick's salary had been for the past 2 years. The charity he thought I was receiving from brands actually represented a 6-figure income that I'd been quietly funneling into our shared expenses while he took credit for our comfortable lifestyle. But the financial revelation wasn't what broke my heart. It was the realization that my husband had been lying to me for years, not just about understanding my work, but about respecting me as a person. Every time he'd nodded along when I shared my excitement about a new partnership or milestone, he'd been humoring me the way you might humor a child playing dress-up. The pattern became impossible to ignore once I started paying attention. Patrick's responses to my work followed a script I'd never noticed before. Surface-level acknowledgement followed by subtle redirection toward more important topics. When I mentioned that my latest video had hit 1 million views, he'd say something like, "That's nice, honey, but did you remember to call the insurance company about the car?" When I got excited about a brand wanting to extend our partnership, he'd respond with, "Great, but we really need to talk about our budget for real expenses." Every achievement was minimized, every success was diminished, and every milestone was treated as a distraction from more serious matters. The man who'd once helped me film my first videos now couldn't even pretend to care about my accomplishments. That evening, Patrick came home from work with flowers, a gesture that would have pleased me a week earlier, but now felt like another performance. He kissed my cheek and asked about my day with the same tone he might use to ask about the weather. "How was the computer time today?" he asked, settling into his chair with a beer. The phrase hit differently now that I knew how he really talked about my work. Computer time. Like I was a teenager being allowed recreational screen access instead of a professional running a successful business. "It was productive," I said carefully. "I finished editing the KitchenAid video, and my manager called about a potential partnership with Williams-Sonoma." Patrick hummed non-committally, already reaching for the TV remote. "That's nice. What's for dinner?" The dismissal was so complete, so practiced, that I realized this wasn't new behavior. I just finally recognized it for what it was. Patrick had been patronizing me for years. I'd simply been too trusting to see it. Over the following days, I started documenting his behavior with the same attention to detail I brought to my content creation. I noticed how he changed the subject whenever I mentioned work, how he'd physically turn away from me when I tried to share something exciting, how he'd respond to my business calls with exaggerated sighs and eye rolls. But the most telling moment came when his mother called during one of my filming sessions. I was in the middle of recording a complex recipe that required precise timing, and Patrick knew I couldn't be interrupted. Yet he answered Dorothy's call on speakerphone in the next room, their voices easily audible through our thin walls. "How's Ella's little hobby going?" Dorothy asked with barely concealed contempt. "Oh, you know," Patrick replied, still pretending she's running some kind of business. She was talking about Williams-Sonoma wanting to work with her, as if a real company would partner with someone filming in their kitchen. They both laughed, and I stood frozen behind my camera, spatula in hand, as they dissected my work like it was a shared joke between them. "Well, at least she's keeping busy," Dorothy said. "Though I do worry about when she'll focus on more important things. Maybe give you some grandchildren instead of wasting time on this internet nonsense." "I'm working on it, Mom," Patrick said, and there was something in his voice that made my stomach clench. The anniversary dinner might be a good time to have some serious conversations about priorities. The call ended, but I remained motionless, understanding with horrible clarity that my marriage wasn't just failing, it was being actively sabotaged by people who'd never seen me as anything more than an obstacle to their vision of Patrick's life. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling while Patrick slept peacefully beside me, and I made a decision that would change everything. If they wanted to have serious conversations about priorities at our anniversary dinner, I'd be ready for them. But first, I needed to understand exactly what I was dealing with. The morning after overhearing Patrick's phone call with Mark, I began what I now think of as my awakening period. Instead of confronting Patrick directly, something the old me would have done immediately, I decided to approach this like the investigative content creator I'd become. I needed facts, evidence, and a complete understanding of the situation before making any moves. My first step was digital archaeology. Patrick had never been particularly careful with his online activities, assuming I was too absorbed in my little projects to pay attention to what he was doing. He was wrong. While Patrick was at work, I opened his laptop. The password was still our wedding date, which felt ironic given what I was discovering about his feelings toward our marriage. His browser history told a story I hadn't been prepared for. Over the past 6 months, Patrick had been researching divorce attorneys, spousal support laws, and something that made my blood run cold: how to prove spouse's income is not sustainable. He wasn't just dismissing my work, he was building a case against it. I found bookmarked articles about internet bubble bursts and influencer marketing scams. Patrick had been collecting evidence to support his narrative that my income was temporary and unreliable, despite my business showing consistent growth for 3 consecutive years. One particularly damning bookmark was titled "Protecting Assets When Spouse Has Unrealistic Career Expectations." But the most revealing discovery was a Word document buried in his work folder, titled simply "Notes." When I opened it, I found what appeared to be talking points for the anniversary dinner. Ella's computer hobby has gone on long enough. Need to discuss realistic expectations for contributing to household internet money. Isn't reliable income. Show articles about failed influencers. Time to focus on real career or family planning. Parents write about enabling fantasy lifestyle. Reading those bullet points felt like discovering a battle plan designed specifically to destroy my confidence and self-worth. But what struck me most was the clinical tone. This wasn't an emotional husband struggling with our relationship. This was a calculated campaign to undermine everything I'd built. I photographed everything with my phone, then moved on to his email accounts. Patrick used the same few passwords for everything, a security flaw I'd mentioned numerous times, but that now worked in my favor. His personal Gmail revealed months of correspondence with Dorothy and Eric that painted a disturbing picture of family coordination. "You're absolutely right about the enabling," Patrick had written to his father 3 weeks earlier. "I've been too soft on this internet stuff. The anniversary dinner will be the perfect opportunity to set some boundaries and expectations." Eric's response was even more direct: "Son, you're the man of the house. It's time she understood her role. Dorothy and I will be there to support you when you lay down the law." Dorothy's emails were particularly vicious. She'd been sending Patrick articles about failed women entrepreneurs and the dangers of supporting unrealistic dreams. One message included a link to a blog post titled "When Your Wife's Hobby Becomes an Obsession," with Dorothy's comment: "This could have been written about your situation." But the smoking gun was an email thread from 2 weeks earlier, where they'd explicitly planned the anniversary humiliation. "Dorothy, public accountability might be exactly what she needs. Sometimes people require an audience to accept difficult truths." Patrick, "I was thinking Romano's nice enough that she can't make a scene, but busy enough that she'll feel the social pressure to accept what I'm saying." Eric, "Good thinking. The embarrassment will help the lesson stick. We'll be there for moral support." They'd planned to humiliate me. They'd chosen the restaurant specifically because they believed I'd be too embarrassed to defend myself in public. They'd coordinated this attack like a military operation, with each family member assigned a role in my destruction. I sat in our home office, surrounded by the evidence of their conspiracy, feeling a strange mixture of devastation and clarity. The marriage I'd been trying to save had been dead for months, I just hadn't been informed yet. But as I continued digging, I discovered something that shifted my perspective entirely. In Patrick's web browsing history, mixed among the divorce research and failed influencer articles, were searches that revealed the true scope of his ignorance. How much do food bloggers actually make? Average income lifestyle influencers, and are YouTube partnerships real money? The timestamps on these searches were recent, within the past 2 weeks. Patrick was finally trying to understand what I actually did for a living, and what he was discovering was clearly not matching the narrative he'd built about my hobby. I found a browser tab still open to a blog post titled Top Food Influencer Earnings: What the Numbers Really Look Like. The article featured several creators with subscriber counts similar to mine, and their reported annual incomes ranged from $200,000 to over $500,000. Someone had highlighted the salary ranges and added handwritten notes in the margins. This can't be right, and these numbers seem fake. The handwriting was Patrick's. This revelation changed everything. Patrick wasn't just dismissing my work out of sexism or family pressure. He genuinely had no idea what I was actually earning. His parents had convinced him that internet businesses were elaborate hobbies, and he'd never bothered to verify their claims or understand the industry I worked in. In his mind, I was playing with a camera while he paid our bills. In reality, I was subsidizing our lifestyle while he took credit for our financial stability. The disconnect wasn't just cruel, it was absurd. I pulled up my business banking statements and began calculating numbers that would have shocked Patrick if he'd ever bothered to look. My income for the previous year alone was more than he'd earned in his entire 5-year career at the insurance company. The partnership deals he thought were free samples represented contracts worth tens of thousands of dollars each. The Williams-Sonoma partnership he'd mocked to his mother. It was a 6-month deal worth $85,000, more than his annual salary. The computer time he complained about represented work that had funded our kitchen renovation, his new car, and the vacation to Hawaii he'd bragged to his friends about providing for us. But the most staggering discovery was how much money I'd been quietly contributing to our shared expenses without ever demanding recognition. I'd paid for everything from groceries to utilities to his car insurance, all while he maintained the fiction that he was our sole provider. I hadn't demanded credit because I'd assumed we were partners building a life together. Now I realized I'd been funding the comfortable lifestyle of someone who viewed me as a burden. As I sat surrounded by bank statements and profit reports, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: genuine pride in what I'd accomplished. Removed from Patrick's constant minimization and his family's dismissive comments, the numbers spoke for themselves. I wasn't just successful, I was thriving. More importantly, I was financially independent in ways Patrick couldn't even comprehend. The realization was both liberating and terrifying. I had the resources to leave him, to start over, to build whatever life I wanted without requiring his approval or support. But I also had the power to stay and fight, to force him to confront the reality of who I actually was, versus who he'd decided I should be. That evening, when Patrick came home and asked about my computer time with his usual patronizing smile, I looked at him differently. This man who thought he was generously supporting my delusions was actually the one living in a fantasy world. He'd built an entire identity around being my provider, while I'd been quietly out-earning him for years. It was productive, I told him, the same response I'd given the day before. But this time, I was already planning how to show him exactly how productive it had been. The anniversary dinner was 3 weeks away. That gave me just enough time to prepare a presentation that would shatter every assumption Patrick and his family had made about my worth, my work, and my willingness to accept their condescension. They wanted to have a conversation about realistic expectations and contribution to the household. Perfect. I'd give them numbers they wouldn't be able to dismiss or minimize. But first, I needed to secure my position. If this marriage was ending, and Patrick's research suggested he was already planning for that possibility, I wasn't going to let him control the narrative or the financial outcome. It was time to stop being the grateful wife who accepted crumbs of recognition. It was time to show them exactly what worthless looked like when it had a net worth they couldn't ignore. What I discovered next made Patrick's individual betrayal seem almost quaint by comparison. As I dug deeper into the family's communication patterns, I realized I wasn't dealing with one dismissive husband. I was up against an entire network of people who had been systematically working to undermine me for years. The revelation came when I found Dorothy's personal email account password, saved in Patrick's browser. Apparently, she'd asked him to help her with something technical months earlier, and he'd saved her login credentials. What I found in her sent folder was a masterclass in psychological manipulation that left me breathless with its scope and cruelty. Dorothy hadn't just been influencing Patrick, she'd been conducting a campaign to turn our entire social circle against me. The first email thread I discovered was with Blanche Stewart, my former best friend from culinary school who had gradually distanced herself over the past 2 years. I'd attributed the cooling of our friendship to busy schedules and different life paths, but Dorothy's emails revealed a different story entirely. "Blanche, I'm so worried about Ella," Dorothy had written 8 months earlier. "Patrick tries to be supportive, but this internet obsession is really concerning. She's spending all day talking to a camera instead of focusing on her marriage or building real relationships. I thought since you were friends you might be able to reach out and encourage her to pursue more grounded interests." Blanche's response was diplomatic, but clearly influenced. "I have noticed she seems very focused on her online presence when we talk. I'll try to steer our conversations toward other topics and maybe suggest some activities that would get her away from the computer." The exchange continued for months, with Dorothy feeding Blanche a steady stream of concerns about my obsessive behavior and unrealistic expectations. Dorothy positioned herself as the worried mother-in-law trying to help her son's wife, while painting me as someone who'd lost touch with reality and needed intervention from concerned friends. But Dorothy's manipulation extended far beyond Blanche. I found similar email threads with our neighbors, members of Patrick's extended family, and even some of my professional contacts. In each case, Dorothy presented herself as discreetly concerned about my well-being, while subtly undermining my credibility and success. To our neighbor Mrs. Chen, Dorothy wrote, "I worry that Ella is so isolated spending all that time alone with her computer. Patrick works so hard to provide for them, and I think she's lost perspective on what really matters in a marriage." To Patrick's cousin Sarah, "It's sweet that Ella has her little hobby, but I do worry about her grasp on reality. She talks about these internet projects like they're a real business, and I think it's starting to affect her mental health." To a mutual acquaintance from church, "Please keep Ella in your prayers. This internet phase has gone on much longer than anyone expected, and we're all concerned about when she'll refocus on more meaningful pursuits." Each email was carefully crafted to sound loving and concerned while actually poisoning people's perception of me and my work. Dorothy had positioned herself as the voice of reason surrounded by people too polite to express their own concerns about my concerning behavior. But the most devastating discovery was Dorothy's correspondence with people in my professional network. She'd somehow obtained the contact information for several brands I'd worked with, and had been reaching out to them under the guise of family concern. "Hello, I'm writing as someone who cares deeply about Ella Morgan Reed," she'd written to a marketing manager at a kitchen appliance company. "I wanted to discreetly reach out because I'm concerned about her current mental state. She's become very isolated and obsessive about her online activities, and I worry she may not be in the right headspace to represent your brand effectively. I thought you should be aware of the situation." The response from the marketing manager was professional but cool. "Thank you for your concern. We'll take your feedback into consideration for future partnerships." I stared at that exchange for a long time, understanding finally why several brand relationships had ended abruptly without clear explanation. Dorothy hadn't just been undermining me socially, she'd been actively sabotaging my business relationships. The scope of her campaign was breathtaking. Over the course of 18 months, Dorothy had systematically contacted friends, neighbors, acquaintances, and professional contacts, planting seeds of doubt about my mental stability, work ethic, and priorities. She'd convinced people that my success was either exaggerated or unhealthy, that I needed intervention rather than support. Most insidiously, she'd done it all under the banner of loving concern. Anyone who received these emails would see a worried mother-in-law trying to help, not a manipulative woman working to destroy her daughter-in-law's reputation and livelihood. But Dorothy's emails revealed something else. She knew exactly how successful I actually was, and she was threatened by it. In a particularly revealing message to Eric, she wrote, "The problem isn't that Ella's failing, it's that she's succeeding. Patrick is starting to feel inadequate, and these income reports she shows him are making him question his role as provider. We need to refocus her attention on supporting Patrick's career and building a proper family instead of this selfish pursuit of individual achievement." There it was, laid out with stunning clarity. Dorothy understood that my business was genuinely successful, but she viewed that success as a threat to traditional family dynamics, where the husband was the primary earner and the wife was the supportive homemaker. My financial independence wasn't a failure to be corrected, it was a success to be destroyed. Eric's response was equally illuminating. "You're absolutely right. Women who out-earn their husbands create unstable marriages. We need to nip this in the bud before Patrick starts feeling emasculated." The anniversary dinner intervention is a good start, but we may need to consider more drastic measures if she doesn't get the message. More drastic measures. The phrase sent chills down my spine as I realized this family viewed my success as a problem that required increasingly aggressive solutions. I found more evidence in Dorothy's photo album on her phone, which automatically synced to her email account. She'd been documenting my work setup, taking pictures during family visits of my camera equipment, ring lights, and computer monitors. The photos were accompanied by captions like Ella's elaborate setup for her internet hobby and the office that used to be a guest room. She'd been building a visual case to support her narrative of my obsessive behavior, carefully framing my professional equipment as evidence of mental instability rather than business investment. But the most chilling discovery was a document Dorothy had created titled Intervention Strategies. It outlined a multi-phase plan to separate me from my work and refocus my energy on appropriate priorities. Phase 1. Social isolation. Discourage friends from supporting internet activities. Phase 2. Professional discrediting discreet outreach to business contacts. Phase 3. Family pressure. Coordinate with Patrick for direct confrontation. Phase 4. Financial intervention. Limit access to equipment and workspace. Phase 5. Medical consultation. Suggest therapy for internet addiction. Was looking at a systematic plan to destroy my career, isolate me from my support network, and gaslight me into believing I had a mental health problem that required treatment. The anniversary dinner wasn't just a humiliation, it was phase 3 of a comprehensive campaign to dismantle my independence. As I sat in my office, surrounded by evidence of this conspiracy, I felt a cold rage settling over me. This wasn't just about Patrick's wounded ego or his parents' disapproval of my unconventional career. This was about a family that viewed my success as so threatening to their worldview that they'd spent nearly 2 years systematically working to destroy it. They'd turned friends against me, cost me business relationships, and isolated me socially, all while maintaining a facade of loving concern for my well-being. They'd gaslit me into believing that the growing distance in my relationships was my fault, that my focus on work was isolating me from the people who mattered. But now I understood the truth. I hadn't been losing friends because I was obsessed with my work. I'd been losing friends because Dorothy had been poisoning them against me, one carefully crafted email at a time. The realization was devastating, but it was also clarifying. This wasn't a marriage worth saving, or a family worth appeasing. These were people who saw my success as a problem to be solved, my independence as a threat to be neutralized. They wanted to reduce me to their vision of what a wife should be: grateful, dependent, and appropriately modest in my ambitions. They'd spent 2 years working toward that goal with the patience and dedication of people who believed they were saving their family from a dangerous influence. Well, if they wanted to see dangerous, I was about to show them exactly how dangerous a financially independent woman could be when she stopped pretending to need their approval. The anniversary dinner was going to be their intervention, but I was planning something they'd never expect: my declaration of independence, backed by numbers they couldn't dispute and evidence they couldn't deny. Phase 3 of their plan was about to become phase 1 of mine. As I delved deeper into the family's coordinated campaign against me, I discovered that their manipulation extended far beyond social sabotage and emotional manipulation. They had been systematically positioning themselves to gain control over my financial assets and business operations, preparing for what Dorothy's emails revealed as the inevitable collapse of Ella's internet fantasy. The first red flag came when I examined our joint financial accounts more carefully. Over the past year, Patrick had been making subtle changes to our banking arrangements that I'd attributed to his desire to streamline our finances. Now I understood these changes were part of a larger strategy to limit my financial independence. Patrick had convinced me to consolidate several of my business accounts into joint accounts for tax purposes, claiming his insurance company's accountant had recommended it. I'd agreed because it seemed reasonable, and because I trusted my husband to have our shared interests at heart. What I discovered was that Patrick had been using his position as joint account holder to monitor every transaction, categorize my business expenses as hobby costs, and position himself as the primary account holder for legal purposes. More disturbing was what I found in Patrick's desk drawer, a folder labeled Financial Planning that contained documents I'd never seen before. Inside were applications for credit cards in my name that had been filled out but never submitted, loan applications for substantial amounts against our home equity, and most alarmingly, a power of attorney document that would give Patrick full control over my business assets in case of my incapacitation. The power of attorney document was particularly sophisticated. It had been prepared by a law firm Dorothy had recommended, and it included provisions that would allow Patrick to make business decisions on my behalf if I was deemed unable to manage financial affairs due to mental health concerns or internet addiction. The language was carefully crafted to sound protective, while actually creating a legal framework for taking control of my business if they could establish that my obsessive online behavior constituted a mental health issue. I photographed everything, my hands shaking as I realized how close I'd come to signing away my financial independence. Patrick had presented these documents to me several months earlier as routine financial planning, claiming we needed to protect each other in case of emergency. I'd been busy with a major content campaign and had asked him to give me time to review them properly. He'd seemed understanding, but now I realized he'd been waiting for the right moment to pressure me into signing, probably after the anniversary dinner intervention, when I was emotionally vulnerable and doubting my own judgment. But the financial manipulation went deeper than I'd initially understood. I discovered that Dorothy had been working behind the scenes to undermine my business relationships in ways that would force me to depend more heavily on Patrick's income. The brand partnerships that had ended abruptly hadn't just been affected by her emails expressing family concern, she'd been more actively sabotaging my professional reputation. I found evidence that Dorothy had created fake social media accounts to leave negative reviews on my content, claiming I was unstable and unreliable. She'd posted comments on my videos, suggesting that I was struggling with mental health issues and couldn't be trusted with brand partnerships. These comments were designed to look like they came from concerned viewers, but the IP addresses, which I could track through my analytics, all traced back to Dorothy's home network. More devastatingly, Dorothy had been impersonating me in professional communications. She'd somehow gained access to one of my old email accounts, probably through Patrick, and had been sending unprofessional messages to brands and potential partners. I found drafts in her email where she'd practiced writing in my voice, crafting messages that would make me appear unreliable, demanding, or difficult to work with. One particularly damaging email she'd sent to a major food network pretending to be me read, "I'm reconsidering our partnership because I don't think your brand aligns with my vision anymore. I've been getting advice from my family that I should focus on more stable opportunities, and frankly, I'm not sure this influencer thing is sustainable long term. Maybe we should cancel our upcoming campaign." The Food Network had responded professionally, expressing understanding and wishing me well, but they'd also removed me from their preferred creator list and marked my file as may not be reliable for future partnerships. Dorothy had cost me what could have been a six-figure annual relationship by pretending to be me and expressing doubt about my own career stability. The scope of this financial sabotage was staggering. Over the past 18 months, Dorothy's interference had cost me approximately $200,000 in lost partnerships, canceled contracts, and damaged professional relationships. She'd been systematically destroying my earning potential, while Patrick positioned himself as the family's sole reliable income source. But perhaps most insidiously, they'd been documenting my business expenses in a way that would support their narrative of irresponsible spending. Patrick had been keeping a detailed log of every piece of equipment I purchased, every software subscription I maintained, and every business meal I deducted. categorizing all of it as hobby expenses and calculating the total cost of Ella's internet obsession. According to his spreadsheet, my business had cost us over $50,000 in the past year alone. But he'd only counted expenses, completely ignoring the income my business generated. It was creative accounting designed to make my profitable business look like an expensive liability. I found emails where Patrick shared these calculations with his parents, using them as evidence that my hobby was financially irresponsible and unsustainable. "Look at how much money she's spending on camera equipment and software," he'd written to Eric. "She's completely lost perspective on our budget." And Eric's response revealed the endgame: "Keep documenting everything. If this marriage fails, you'll need evidence that her internet activities were a financial drain rather than a contribution. No judge will award her spousal support if you can prove she was wasting money on a fake business." They weren't just planning to humiliate me at the anniversary dinner, they were building a legal case to ensure I'd have no financial recourse if I tried to leave the marriage. They'd systematically undermined my earning potential while documenting my business investments as evidence of financial irresponsibility. The most chilling discovery was a consultation receipt from a forensic accountant that Dorothy had hired to evaluate the sustainability of internet-based income for legal purposes. They'd been preparing to argue in court that my business income was temporary, unreliable, and not legitimate grounds for spousal support or asset division. But as I studied their strategy, I realized they'd made a crucial miscalculation. All of their documentation of my expensive hobby was actually evidence of my business investments and professional expenses. Their attempts to categorize my equipment purchases as wasteful spending had created a detailed record of my business assets and operational costs. More importantly, they had no idea about the full scope of my financial independence. While they'd been monitoring our joint accounts and documenting my business expenses, I'd been maintaining separate accounts that they knew nothing about. My highest earning partnerships deposited directly into business accounts that weren't connected to our shared banking. Patrick knew about my computer hobby income because I'd shared some earnings with him. But he had no idea that my total annual income was nearly 4 times what I'd disclosed. I'd been modest about my success, partly out of humility and partly because his reactions to even small successes had been so dismissive that I'd stopped sharing good news with him. The Dunbar family had been planning to financially devastate me based on their assumption that Patrick was my primary source of income and security. They'd built their entire strategy around the belief that threatening my marriage would force me to abandon my career to save the relationship. They had no idea that I could walk away from this marriage tomorrow and be more financially secure than Patrick had ever been in his life. As I sat in my office, surrounded by evidence of their conspiracy, I felt a strange calm settling over me. They'd shown me exactly who they were and what they were capable of. They'd revealed their strategy, their timeline, and their endgame. Now it was time to show them mine. The anniversary dinner was 2 weeks away. That gave me just enough time to secure my assets, document their fraud, and prepare a presentation that would destroy every assumption they'd made about my vulnerability and dependence. They wanted to see my financial records. Perfect. I'd show them financial records, just not the ones they were expecting. The morning after discovering the full scope of the Dunbar family's conspiracy, I made a decision that would have seemed impossible just weeks earlier. I was going to fight back with the same level of strategic planning they'd used against me. But unlike their campaign of manipulation and sabotage, mine would be built on truth, legal documentation, and financial transparency. My first call was to Margaret Chen, an attorney who specialized in business protection and matrimonial law. I'd met her at a networking event for female entrepreneurs 6 months earlier, and she'd given me her card with the comment that successful women always need good legal counsel. At the time, I'd thought it was just professional courtesy. Now I understood it was wisdom. "Ella, I'm glad you called," Margaret said when I reached her office that afternoon. "From what you've described over the phone, we need to move quickly to protect your business interests and document the financial manipulation you've discovered." Margaret's office was in a sleek downtown building, her conference room overlooking the city with floor-to-ceiling windows that made me feel simultaneously powerful and exposed. As I spread out the evidence I'd gathered, screenshots of emails, financial documents, records of sabotaged business relationships, Margaret's expression grew increasingly grim. "This is sophisticated financial and emotional abuse," she said. After reviewing Dorothy's impersonation emails and Patrick's power of attorney documents, they've been systematically undermining your business while positioning themselves to take control of your assets. The good news is that everything they've done is well documented, which works in our favor. Margaret explained that Washington state's community property laws meant that Patrick was entitled to half of any assets acquired during our marriage, but my business, which I'd started before our wedding, remained separate property. However, the commingling of business and personal funds in our joint accounts had created complications that needed immediate attention. We need to separate your business assets immediately, Margaret advised. Every day your income flows through joint accounts gives them more legal standing to claim community property interest in your business earnings. Over the next 2 hours, Margaret helped me understand the legal landscape I was navigating. The power of attorney document Patrick had tried to get me to sign was legally problematic on several fronts. The provisions about mental health concerns and internet addiction were so vaguely defined that they could be interpreted broadly, potentially giving Patrick control over my business decisions based on subjective family opinions about my work habits. If you'd signed this, Margaret said, holding up the document, they could have argued that your focus on your business constituted obsessive behavior requiring intervention. They could have limited your access to business accounts, canceled contracts on your behalf, and made major business decisions without your input. The implications were staggering. I realized that the anniversary dinner intervention wasn't just about humiliating me into submission, it was about creating a public scene that could later be used as evidence of my unstable behavior to justify implementing the power of attorney provisions. Margaret immediately began drafting documents to protect my business interests. We established a comprehensive asset protection plan that included immediate separation of all business accounts from joint marital accounts, documentation of my business's separate property, status corporate restructuring to protect intellectual property and brand assets, cease and desist letters regarding the impersonation and sabotage activities, a detailed forensic accounting of the financial damage caused by Dorothy's interference. But Margaret's most valuable advice was strategic rather than legal. They're expecting you to react emotionally, she explained. Everything they've planned, the public humiliation, the family pressure, the financial manipulation, is designed to make you feel powerless and dependent. The best way to counter this is to respond from a position of documented strength. She helped me understand that the anniversary dinner, rather than being a trap I needed to avoid, could actually be the perfect opportunity to reveal the truth about our financial situation in a way that would be impossible for them to dismiss or minimize. You have something they don't expect, Margaret noted, reviewing my business financial statements, complete financial independence and documented proof of their manipulation. If you choose to confront them publicly, you'll be doing it from a position of strength they can't argue with. We spent the following week preparing what Margaret called my truth portfolio, a comprehensive collection of documents that would irrefutably demonstrate both my business success and their systematic sabotage. The portfolio included 3 years of business tax returns showing consistent 6-figure income growth, independently verified by my accountant, bank statements from my separate business accounts that Patrick had never seen, showing liquid assets that exceeded his annual salary by significant margins, contracts with major brands proving the legitimacy and profitability of my partnerships, analytics reports from my content platforms showing audience engagement and growth metrics, documentation of Dorothy's impersonation activities, including IP address tracking and comparison of writing styles, screenshots of the family's email conspiracy showing premeditation and coordination, financial analysis of the damage caused by their sabotage, calculated by a forensic accountant Margaret recommended. But perhaps most powerfully, we prepared a comprehensive business valuation that demonstrated the current worth of my brand and intellectual property. The number was sobering. My business, including brand value, audience assets, and projected earnings, was worth more than Patrick would earn in his entire insurance career. The key, Margaret explained, is not just showing them what you're worth, but demonstrating that you've been financially independent throughout this entire marriage. They've built their strategy around the assumption that you need Patrick's support. Proving that assumption wrong will invalidate everything they've planned. Margaret also helped me understand the legal implications of Dorothy's impersonation activities. By sending emails pretending to be me and damaging my business relationships, Dorothy had committed several actionable offenses including identity theft, business interference, and defamation. We could pursue civil remedies that would not only recover my financial losses, but also prevent future interference. You have grounds for a substantial lawsuit against Dorothy personally, Margaret explained. The financial damage alone exceeds $200,000, and that's before we calculate the ongoing harm to your business reputation. As we prepared my case, I began to see the anniversary dinner differently. Instead of dreading it as my public execution, I started viewing it as my declaration of independence. They were planning to use a public setting to humiliate me, but I could use that same public setting to reveal truths they'd never wanted acknowledged. Margaret helped me craft a response strategy that would be devastating in its simplicity: complete financial transparency. While they prepared to lecture me about contributing to the household and facing reality about my hobby, I would present documentation showing that I'd been the primary financial contributor to our marriage for years. The beauty of truth, Margaret observed, is that it doesn't require elaborate planning or coordination, you just have to be willing to share it. We prepared talking points that would systematically address each aspect of their planned intervention. When they claimed my work wasn't a real business, I'd show them legitimate business tax returns and corporate documentation. When they argued about financial responsibility, I'd present bank statements showing my substantial contributions to our shared expenses. When they suggested I needed to focus on real career opportunities, I'd share contracts proving my income exceeded Patrick's by significant margins. When Dorothy tried to position herself as the concerned family member, I'd reveal her emails showing systematic sabotage and impersonation. But Margaret's most important advice was about timing and presentation. Don't defend or justify, she counseled. Simply present facts and let them speak for themselves. The more emotional they become in response to your evidence, the more their true motivations will be revealed to everyone watching. As our preparation sessions concluded, I felt a transformation completing itself. The woman who discovered her husband's betrayal 2 weeks earlier had been hurt, confused, and defensive. The woman who would walk into Romano's for the anniversary dinner would be armed with truth, protected by law, and financially independent beyond anything the Dunbar family had imagined. They'd spent 2 years building a case against my character and my work. I'd spent 2 weeks building a case against their conspiracy. The difference was that their case was built on lies and manipulation, while mine was built on documented facts and financial reality. In less than a week they'd discover which foundation was stronger. As I prepared for the anniversary confrontation, Margaret suggested I research the Dunbar family's history more thoroughly. Patterns of manipulation and control rarely emerge in isolation, she explained. Understanding their past behavior might give us insight into their methods and help us anticipate their responses. What I discovered was far more disturbing than I'd expected. The Dunbar family's treatment of me wasn't an anomaly, it was part of a documented pattern of behavior that stretched back decades, leaving a trail of destroyed relationships and damaged lives in their wake. My investigation began with public records and social media archaeology. Dorothy and Eric had been married for 35 years, and their social media presence painted a picture of an ideal family with traditional values and strong community connections. But when I dug deeper into their past, a different story emerged. The first crack in their facade came through obituary records. Eric's brother Philip Dunbar had died 5 years earlier, and his obituary made no mention of Eric or Dorothy despite their living in the same city. When I searched for Philip's widow, Esther Dunbar, I found her contact information and made a decision that would prove crucial. I called her. "Oh my," Esther said when I introduced myself as Patrick's wife. "I'm so sorry, dear, I had no idea Patrick had gotten married." Eric and Dorothy never mentioned it. The conversation that followed was revelatory. Esther explained that Philip and Eric had been estranged for over a decade following a family business dispute that had destroyed Philip's career and nearly bankrupted him. Eric and Dorothy had this way of making everyone feel like they were disappointing the family, Esther explained, her voice carrying years of accumulated hurt. Philip worked for Eric's insurance agency for 15 years, building up the client base and developing new business. But when Philip suggested expanding into financial planning services, which would have been hugely profitable, Eric became threatened by his success. The parallels to my own situation were chilling. Like me, Philip had been successful and innovative, bringing fresh ideas that could have benefited the entire family. And like me, he'd been systematically undermined when his success threatened Eric's position as family patriarch. Dorothy started rumors about Philip's judgment and reliability, Esther continued. She'd call our mutual friends expressing concern about Philip's ambitious plans, suggesting he was getting too big for his britches and forgetting his place in the family hierarchy. The strategy was identical to what Dorothy had done to me, using fake concern to poison relationships and undermine professional credibility. But Philip's story had a darker ending than mine was heading toward. They finally forced Philip out of the business by claiming he was making unauthorized financial decisions and putting clients at risk, Esther said. Eric fired him publicly at the annual company picnic, claiming it was for the protection of their clients. Philip never recovered professionally. The reputation damage was too severe. I asked about Patrick's relationship with his uncle, and Esther's response was heartbreaking. Patrick was close to Philip when he was younger. Philip mentored him, taught him about business and integrity. But when the conflict started, Dorothy and Eric made Patrick choose sides. They convinced him that Philip was a threat to the family's stability, and that supporting him would be disloyal to his parents. The pattern was becoming clear. The Dunbar family demanded absolute loyalty and submission to Eric and Dorothy's vision of proper family hierarchy. Anyone who threatened that structure through success, independence, or different ideas was systematically destroyed. But Esther's story wasn't the only example. Through online searches and public records, I found references to other family conflicts that followed similar patterns. Dorothy's own sister Blanche Dunbar, who'd taken Dorothy's maiden name after her divorce, had been estranged from the family for over 20 years following a dispute about their mother's care. I found Blanche's contact information and reached out explaining who I was and what I'd discovered about the family's treatment of me. Her response was immediate and supportive. "I've been waiting for this call for years," Blanche said, when we spoke. "I knew Dorothy would eventually turn on Patrick's wife, especially if she showed any independence or success. It's what Dorothy does. She can't tolerate other women who don't submit to her authority." Blanche's story revealed another dimension of Dorothy's manipulative behavior. When their mother had developed dementia, Blanche had suggested professional care and family meetings to coordinate support. Dorothy had responded by taking complete control of their mother's care and finances, then claiming that Blanche was trying to abandon their mother for selfish reasons. "Dorothy convinced everyone that I was irresponsible and uncaring," Blanche explained. "She turned my own children against me by claiming I wanted to put their grandmother in a nursing home to steal her money. It was exactly the opposite of the truth, but Dorothy's version was simpler and more dramatic." The isolation campaign that followed was devastatingly familiar. Dorothy had contacted Blanche's friends, neighbors, and even her employer, expressing concern about Blanche's selfish behavior toward their dying mother. By the time their mother passed away, Blanche had lost most of her social support network and several professional relationships. "The worst part," Blanche said, was that Dorothy genuinely believed she was the hero of the story. She saw herself as protecting the family from dangerous outside influences, anyone who questioned her authority or threatened her control. As I compiled these stories, a clear psychological profile emerged. Dorothy wasn't just manipulative, she was systematically threatened by anyone who achieved independence or success within her sphere of influence. She viewed other people's accomplishments as challenges to her authority, rather than family achievements to celebrate. Eric enabled and amplified this behavior by providing the patriarchal framework that justified Dorothy's actions. In his worldview, family hierarchy was sacred, and anyone who disrupted that hierarchy deserved whatever consequences followed. But the most disturbing revelation came when I researched Patrick's romantic history. Through social media archaeology and mutual acquaintances, I discovered that I wasn't Patrick's first serious relationship to end under mysterious circumstances. His previous girlfriend, a woman named Sarah Chen who'd been a successful marketing executive, had dated Patrick for 3 years before their relationship ended abruptly. When I reached out to Sarah through LinkedIn, her response was immediate and knowing. "Let me guess," Sarah wrote back. "Dorothy has been expressing concern about your career and suggesting you need to focus more on supporting Patrick, and Patrick has been gradually becoming more dismissive of your professional achievements." Sarah's experience had been remarkably similar to mine, though in her case the family's intervention had been more direct. Dorothy had invited Sarah to lunch and explicitly told her that successful career women made unsuitable wives for men in traditional families. "She was very polite about it," Sarah explained when we spoke by phone. "But the message was clear: I could have Patrick or I could have my career, but not both." When I refused to choose, Dorothy made sure the relationship became impossible. The sabotage had been subtle but effective. Dorothy had shared concerns about Sarah's demanding schedule with Patrick, suggested that career-focused women weren't good long-term partners, and gradually convinced Patrick that Sarah was too ambitious to be truly committed to their relationship. "The saddest part," Sarah said, "was watching Patrick change. He'd been proud of my success when we met, but his parents slowly convinced him that my achievements were somehow threatening to his masculinity. By the end, he was asking me to turn down promotions and skip networking events because they made him uncomfortable." Sarah had eventually ended the relationship herself, recognizing that Patrick wasn't strong enough to resist his parents' manipulation. But the experience had taught her to recognize the warning signs of families who viewed successful women as threats rather than assets. "When I heard Patrick had gotten married," Sarah said, "I wondered how long it would take for Dorothy to start her campaign against his new wife. I'm sorry it's happening to you, but I'm not surprised." As I absorbed these stories, I realized that my situation wasn't unique or personal. It was systematic. The Dunbar family had perfected a method for maintaining control over their son by ensuring that any woman in his life was either submissive enough to accept their authority or driven away through coordinated manipulation. They'd successfully destroyed Philip's career, isolated Dorothy's own sister, and ended Patrick's previous serious relationship. I was simply the latest target in a decades-long pattern of psychological warfare, designed to maintain family hierarchy at any cost. But understanding their pattern also revealed their weakness. They'd never encountered someone who documented their behavior and fought back with equal strategic planning. All of their previous victims had been isolated and overwhelmed, lacking the resources or knowledge to counter their tactics effectively. I had something none of their previous targets had possessed: complete financial independence, legal representation, and detailed evidence of their conspiracy. For the first time in their manipulative careers, the Dunbar family was about to face someone who could match their strategic planning while operating from a position of documented truth. The anniversary dinner wasn't just my opportunity for vindication, it was my chance to break a generational pattern of abuse and control that had destroyed too many lives already. 3 days before the anniversary dinner, I received a message that would change everything about my planned confrontation. The LinkedIn notification appeared while I was reviewing my financial documents for the final time, and the sender's name made me do a double take: Arnold Stewart. Arnold was Dorothy's nephew, the son of her estranged sister Blanche. I'd seen his name mentioned in some of the family emails I'd uncovered, always in dismissive terms. Dorothy referred to him as Blanche's disappointing son, and another family failure who couldn't accept guidance. But Arnold's message suggested he was anything but a failure. "Hello Ella," his message read. "I heard through the family grapevine that you've discovered some uncomfortable truths about the Dunbar family dynamics. I think we should talk. I have information that might be useful for your anniversary dinner. Would you be available for coffee tomorrow?" My first instinct was caution. After weeks of discovering how deeply the family's manipulation ran, I wasn't sure I could trust anyone connected to them. But something about Arnold's direct, businesslike tone suggested he wasn't playing games. Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet him at a coffee shop downtown. Arnold Stewart turned out to be nothing like the family disappointment Dorothy had described in her emails. He was a well-dressed man in his early 40s, with kind eyes and the bearing of someone who'd achieved success through his own efforts. When he introduced himself, his handshake was firm and his smile genuine. "I should probably start by explaining why I reached out," Arnold said once we'd settled at a corner table with our drinks. "My mother Blanche told me about your conversation with her. She's been worried about you. She knows exactly what Dorothy is capable of when she decides someone needs to be corrected. Arnold explained that he'd been estranged from the Dunbar side of the family for over 15 years, ever since he'd graduated from law school, and refused to join Eric's insurance agency. They had my whole life planned out, he said with a rueful smile. I was supposed to work for Uncle Eric, marry someone they approved of, and produce the next generation of properly controlled Dunbar family members. Instead, Arnold had built his own successful legal practice specializing in business law and family disputes. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. Dorothy's disappointing nephew had become exactly the kind of attorney I needed to counter their conspiracy. When Blanche told me what they were doing to you, Arnold continued, I realized this was my chance to finally hold them accountable for their behavior. They've been destroying lives for decades, always justifying it as family concern or traditional values. Someone needs to stop them. Arnold's offer was both personal and professional. As Dorothy's nephew, he had insider knowledge of family dynamics and past victims. As an attorney, he could provide additional legal support and strategic advice. But most importantly, he could serve as a credible witness to the family's pattern of manipulation if the anniversary dinner confrontation escalated to legal proceedings. I've been documenting their behavior for years, Arnold revealed, pulling out a tablet and showing me organized files of emails, text messages, and recorded conversations. Every family gathering, every manipulative phone call, every attempt to control or isolate family members. I've been keeping records. The evidence Arnold had compiled was staggering. He'd documented Dorothy's treatment of at least 8 different family members over the past 2 decades, showing a consistent pattern of isolation, sabotage, and emotional manipulation. The files included recorded phone calls, where Dorothy openly discussed her strategies for bringing people back in line, and email exchanges, where she coordinated with Eric to punish family members who showed too much independence. The most damaging evidence, Arnold explained, is a recording I made at Christmas dinner 3 years ago. Dorothy and Eric were discussing their management strategies for different family members, including specific plans for controlling Patrick's future marriage. Arnold played a portion of the recording on his phone. Dorothy's voice was clear and calculating. Patrick needs someone who understands her place in the family hierarchy. Someone grateful for the opportunity to marry well, not someone who thinks she can compete with him professionally. We'll need to screen carefully and intervene early if we see warning signs. Eric's response was equally chilling. The key is making them feel dependent on our approval while gradually isolating them from outside influences. Once they're properly trained, they become assets rather than threats. Listening to them discuss manipulating their future daughter-in-law like a business strategy made my skin crawl. But it also provided irrefutable proof that their treatment of me had been premeditated and systematic. Arnold had even more devastating evidence. He'd discovered that Dorothy and Eric had been using the insurance agency's resources to conduct background checks on potential romantic partners for Patrick. They'd investigated my financial situation, professional relationships, and even my family history before Patrick and I had gotten serious. They knew about your blog's success before you did, Arnold revealed. Dorothy had the agency run a digital footprint analysis on you after Patrick's 3rd date. They knew exactly how much money you were making and how successful your business was becoming. This revelation recontextualized everything. The family's dismissal of my work wasn't born from ignorance, it was a calculated strategy to undermine something they knew was successful. They'd been threatened by my financial independence from the very beginning of my relationship with Patrick. Arnold's insider knowledge also explained some of the more sophisticated aspects of their manipulation. The power of attorney document Patrick had tried to get me to sign had been drafted using legal strategies Dorothy had researched specifically for controlling financially independent spouses. The impersonation emails Dorothy had sent were based on templates she'd developed from previous family conflicts. They've weaponized their knowledge of human psychology, Arnold explained. Dorothy has studied manipulation techniques the way other people study business or medicine. She's not just naturally manipulative, she's educated herself in the most effective methods for psychological control. But Arnold's most valuable contribution wasn't just evidence, it was strategy. As someone who'd successfully escaped the family's control and built an independent life, he understood both their methods and their weaknesses. The key to defeating them, Arnold explained, is understanding that their entire system depends on secrecy and isolation. They can only manipulate people who don't have complete information or outside support. Once their behavior is exposed publicly, with witnesses and documentation, their power evaporates. Arnold offered to attend the anniversary dinner as my legal counsel and witness. His presence would serve multiple purposes. He could document anything they said for potential legal proceedings, provide immediate legal advice if they made threats or admissions, and most importantly, his attendance would signal to the family that their behavior was being professionally scrutinized. They've never faced real consequences for their actions, Arnold said. Everyone they've targeted has either submitted to their control or been driven away quietly. You're the first person with the resources and determination to fight back publicly. As our meeting concluded, Arnold handed me a business card and a USB drive containing copies of all his evidence. Whatever happens at that dinner, he said, you won't be facing them alone. And for the first time in decades, they'll be facing someone who knows exactly what they are and how they operate. The realization that I had a true ally, someone who understood the family's tactics from the inside and had the legal expertise to counter them, transformed my anxiety about the anniversary dinner into genuine anticipation. I wasn't just going to defend myself, I was going to expose a pattern of abuse that had harmed too many people for too long. The Dunbar family was about to discover that their latest target had something none of their previous victims possessed: a witness who couldn't be intimidated, isolated, or discredited. The evening after my meeting with Arnold, something unexpected happened that would add another layer of complexity to my already complicated situation. As I sat in my home office reviewing the evidence we'd compiled, my phone rang with an unknown number. When I answered, Arnold's voice was warmer than it had been during our professional meeting. "I hope you don't mind me calling," he said. "I've been thinking about our conversation today, and I realized there's something I didn't mention that might be important for tomorrow night." We talked for over an hour, and what began as a strategic discussion gradually evolved into something more personal. Arnold shared details about his own experience escaping the Dunbar family's control that resonated deeply with my current struggle. The hardest part wasn't the financial independence or even the legal battles, he explained. It was learning to trust my own judgment again, after years of being told I was selfish, unrealistic, or disappointing the family. Dorothy has this way of making you question everything about yourself. I found myself opening up about feelings I hadn't shared with anyone, not even Margaret. The isolation I'd experienced as my friendships deteriorated, the self-doubt that crept in when Patrick dismissed my achievements, the way I'd started questioning whether my success was real, or if I was indeed living in some kind of fantasy. "That's exactly what they want," Arnold said softly. "Self-doubt is their most powerful weapon. If they can make you question your own perceptions and achievements, they don't need to control you directly, you'll control yourself." Our conversation continued beyond strategy and evidence, moving into more personal territory. Arnold told me about the years he'd spent in therapy learning to rebuild his confidence and trust in his own judgment. He described the challenge of forming healthy relationships after growing up in a family system where love was conditional on submission to authority. "I didn't realize how much their manipulation had affected my ability to connect with people until I tried to build genuine relationships outside the family," he admitted. "I'd been so trained to anticipate criticism and control that I couldn't recognize authentic support when it was offered." There was something in his voice that made me ask, "Are you in a relationship now?" "No," he said, after a pause. "I was engaged 3 years ago, but it ended when I realized I was still carrying too much family baggage to be fully present with someone else. My fiancé deserved better than someone who was still fighting ghosts from his past." The vulnerability in his admission touched something in me that I hadn't expected. Here was someone who understood not just the tactical aspects of dealing with the Dunbar family, but the emotional devastation they could cause. He'd fought the same battle I was fighting and emerged stronger, but not without scars. "Can I ask you something?" I said. surprising myself with my boldness. When you were going through this with your family, did you ever feel like you were losing yourself? Like maybe they were right, and you were the problem? Every day, Arnold replied without hesitation. That's their genius, really. They make you complicit in your own destruction by convincing you that their treatment is somehow for your own good. The number of times I apologized to them for their behavior toward me is embarrassing to remember. We talked until nearly midnight, and by the end of the conversation, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: genuine connection with someone who truly understood my situation. Arnold wasn't just offering professional support, he was offering the validation of shared experience and the hope that it was possible to emerge from the Dunbar family's influence intact. Ella, he said, as we were preparing to hang up, I want you to know that what you're doing tomorrow night isn't just about defending yourself. You're breaking a cycle that has hurt a lot of people. My mother, my Uncle Philip, Patrick's ex-girlfriend Sarah, and who knows how many others. They've gotten away with this behavior for decades because no one has ever had the courage and resources to call them out publicly. The weight of that responsibility was both daunting and empowering. I wasn't just fighting for my own dignity, I was fighting for everyone who'd been silenced or driven away by the Dunbar family's systematic manipulation. The next morning, Arnold sent me a text that read, "Whatever happens tonight, remember that you're not alone. You have people who believe in you and support your right to live independently." It was a simple message, but it carried an emotional weight that surprised me. After months of isolation and gradually losing confidence in my own perceptions, having someone who not only understood my situation but actively supported my resistance felt like a lifeline. That afternoon, as I prepared for the anniversary dinner, I found myself thinking about Arnold's story of recovery and independence. He'd shown me that it was possible to break free from the Dunbar family's control and build a life based on authenticity rather than submission to their authority. But more than that, our conversation had reminded me of something I'd almost forgotten: what it felt like to be truly seen and understood by someone. Patrick had once offered that kind of connection, but his family had systematically eroded his ability to see me clearly. Arnold's perspective was uncompromised by years of family programming and manipulation. As I got dressed for the dinner, choosing a professional but elegant outfit that projected confidence and success, I realized that whatever happened with Patrick and his family, I'd already found something valuable: proof that I could form genuine connections with people who appreciated my strength rather than feeling threatened by it. The anniversary dinner would determine the future of my marriage, but my conversation with Arnold had already shown me that there was life beyond the Dunbar family's control, a life where my success could be celebrated rather than sabotaged, where my independence could be admired rather than pathologized. I looked at myself in the mirror one final time before leaving for Romano's. The woman staring back at me was calm, prepared, and most importantly, no longer alone. I had allies, evidence, and for the first time in months, unshakable confidence in my own worth. The Dunbar family was expecting to break down an isolated, vulnerable woman who doubted her own perceptions. Instead, they were about to face someone who had rediscovered her strength and found people who supported her fight for independence. Tonight, their long-running campaign of control and manipulation would finally meet its match. The morning of the anniversary dinner brought an unexpected development that would transform my planned confrontation from a defensive strategy into something far more powerful. As I sat in my kitchen reviewing my notes one final time, my phone buzzed with a notification that made my heart race. It was an email from Williams-Sonoma's brand partnership manager, and the subject line read, "You Argent, Contract Amendment and Expansion Opportunity." I opened the email with trembling fingers, expecting another piece of bad news related to Dorothy's sabotage campaign. Instead, I found something that would change the entire dynamic of the evening ahead. "Dear Ella," the email began, "we've been so impressed with your content performance and audience engagement that we'd like to discuss an immediate expansion of our partnership. We're prepared to offer you an exclusive 2-year brand ambassadorship with a signing bonus of $150,000 and guaranteed annual compensation of $300,000, plus performance bonuses that could bring your total annual earnings to over $500,000. I read the email 3 times before the numbers fully sank in. This wasn't just a partnership, it was a life-changing contract that would make me one of the highest-paid lifestyle influencers in the industry. The signing bonus alone was more than Patrick's annual salary, and the guaranteed annual compensation was nearly 10 times what he earned. But the timing was what made this offer truly perfect. The email explained that Williams-Sonoma wanted to announce the partnership at a major industry conference next week, but they needed my signed agreement by tomorrow morning to meet their marketing timeline. If you're interested in moving forward, the email continued, please let us know immediately. We understand this is short notice, but we're excited about the potential of this partnership and want to move quickly. I stared at my phone screen, understanding that fate had just handed me the perfect ammunition for the anniversary dinner. Not only could I prove that my hobby was a legitimate business, but I could demonstrate that it was more financially successful than anything the Dunbar family had ever imagined. The Williams-Sonoma offer represented more than just money. It was validation from one of the most respected brands in the home and lifestyle industry. This wasn't a small company taking a chance on an unknown creator. This was a major corporation betting $500,000 on my ability to influence their target market. I called Margaret immediately to discuss the legal implications of signing such a significant contract on the eve of what might become divorce proceedings. This is actually perfect timing, Margaret said, after I read her the offer details. If Patrick tries to claim community property interest in your business earnings, this contract clearly establishes the value and legitimacy of your work as separate from anything he contributed to the marriage. Margaret advised me to sign the contract immediately, both to secure the opportunity and to establish my financial independence beyond any possible dispute. We spent an hour reviewing the terms, and by noon, I had officially become Williams-Sonoma's newest exclusive brand ambassador. The psychological impact of this development was as significant as the financial one. For months I'd been defending my work against Patrick's dismissive comments and his family's sabotage. Now I had concrete proof that major corporations valued my expertise and influence enough to invest hundreds of thousands of dollars in my success. As I prepared for the evening, I printed out the signed contract and added it to the portfolio of evidence I'd compiled. The Williams-Sonoma offer would be my closing argument, undeniable proof that while the Dunbar family had been dismissing my work as a worthless hobby, the business world had been recognizing it as a valuable professional asset. But more than that, the contract represented my complete financial independence. With this partnership secured, I could walk away from my marriage without any concern about economic vulnerability. I wasn't just defending myself against their manipulation, I was demonstrating that their attempts to control me had been built on fundamentally false assumptions about my dependence on Patrick's support. The woman who would walk into Romano's tonight wouldn't just be revealing her success, she'd be announcing her transformation into someone they could never control or diminish again. The Dunbar family's intervention was about to become my declaration of complete independence. With only hours remaining before the anniversary dinner, Arnold and I met at a cafe near Romano's to finalize our strategy. The Williams-Sonoma contract had changed everything, and we needed to adjust our approach to maximize the impact of this new development. This contract is a nuclear weapon, Arnold said as he reviewed the documents. They can't dismiss $500,000 in annual income as a hobby. This completely destroys their narrative about your financial dependence on Patrick. We spent the afternoon coordinating every detail of the evening's confrontation. Arnold would arrive at Romano's separately, positioning himself at the bar where he could observe the entire interaction while remaining unobtrusive. He'd document everything with discreet audio recording equipment, and be ready to intervene if the family made any threats or admissions that required immediate legal response. The timing of my revelations needed to be precisely orchestrated. We decided I should let Patrick and his family complete their planned humiliation speech before responding. This would ensure that their cruelty was fully displayed before I revealed the evidence that would destroy their position. Let them dig their own grave first, Arnold advised. The more elaborate their attack on your character and financial situation, the more devastating your response will be. We organized my evidence portfolio into a specific sequence designed for maximum psychological impact. I would start with basic financial documentation showing my legitimate business income, then escalate to evidence of Dorothy's sabotage campaign, and finally conclude with the Williams-Sonoma contract as proof that my career was not only successful but accelerating. Arnold also helped me prepare responses to the various excuses and deflections the family would likely attempt once their planned intervention backfired. Dorothy would probably claim her interference was motivated by love and concern, so we prepared documentation showing the calculated nature of her sabotage. Eric would likely question the legitimacy of my income, so we had tax returns and bank statements ready to verify every number. But our most important preparation was psychological. Arnold helped me understand that the family's reaction to my evidence would reveal their true motivations in ways that mere accusations could not. When you present proof of your success, Arnold explained, watch their faces carefully. If they were genuinely concerned about your well-being, they'd be happy to learn you're financially secure. If they react with anger or denial, it proves their real motivation was control, not love. As we reviewed our strategy one final time, Arnold handed me a small device that looked like a pen. This is a recording device, he explained. Keep it visible on the table. Everything they say will be documented for potential legal proceedings. The final element of our coordination involved contingency planning. If the confrontation escalated to threats or attempts at intimidation, Arnold would immediately identify himself as my legal counsel and warn them that their behavior was being recorded. If they tried to leave before I finished presenting my evidence, he would block their exit and insist they respond to the documented proof of their manipulation. Remember, Arnold said as we prepared to leave for the restaurant, you're not defending yourself tonight, you're exposing them. There's a crucial difference in how you'll approach the conversation. He was right. For weeks I'd been thinking about this confrontation as my opportunity to prove I wasn't worthless, but the Williams-Sonoma contract had shifted my perspective entirely. I wasn't trying to prove my value, I was demonstrating that their attempts to diminish me had been based on complete ignorance of my actual worth. As we walked toward Romano's, Arnold offered one final piece of advice: whatever happens in there, remember that you've already won. You have financial independence, legal protection, and documented proof of their conspiracy. They're the ones who should be afraid tonight, not you. Standing outside the restaurant where Patrick had planned my public humiliation, I felt a calm confidence settle over me. Inside, the Dunbar family was waiting to execute a plan they'd spent months coordinating. They had no idea that I'd spent weeks building a case that would destroy not just their intervention, but their entire system of manipulation and control. Tonight, their carefully planned campaign would meet its devastating conclusion. Before entering Romano's, I made one final stop that would ensure my complete financial security, regardless of how the evening unfolded. Using my phone, I executed the last phase of the asset protection plan Margaret and I had developed. With a few quick transfers, I moved the $150,000 Williams-Sonoma signing bonus from our joint account into my separate business account. The transaction was completely legal. The money had been earned through my individual business activities, but it represented the final severance of my financial dependence on Patrick. I also executed a series of automated transfers that would redirect all future business income away from our shared accounts. Starting tomorrow, every dollar I earned would flow directly into accounts that Patrick had never accessed and couldn't claim as community property. The psychological impact of these transfers was profound. As I watched the numbers change on my phone screen, I felt the last vestiges of financial vulnerability disappear. Whether my marriage survived the next few hours or not, I would leave Romano's as a completely independent woman. But the asset protection went beyond just money. Over the past week, I'd also secured my intellectual property rights in ways that would prevent any future interference with my business. The Ella's Everyday Magic brand was now officially trademarked in my name alone, and I'd established a corporation that protected my content and audience relationships from any potential community property claims. Margaret had also helped me document the financial damage Dorothy's sabotage had caused to my business. The forensic accounting we'd commissioned showed that her interference had cost me approximately $200,000 in lost partnerships and damaged relationships. This documentation would support both civil claims for damages and potential criminal charges for business interference. As I stood outside Romano's, reviewing the final asset protection checklist on my phone, I realized how completely the balance of power had shifted. 3 weeks ago, I'd been a vulnerable wife afraid of losing her marriage and financial security. Tonight, I was a successful businesswoman with $500,000 in annual guaranteed income, complete legal protection, and documented evidence of the conspiracy against me. The Dunbar family had spent months positioning themselves to financially control me through threats and manipulation. They had no idea that their target had quietly become more financially powerful than they could imagine. My phone buzzed with a final confirmation from my bank. All transfers complete, all accounts secured, all automatic redirects activated. I was now financially bulletproof. The woman walking into Romano's for her anniversary dinner wasn't the same person who'd married Patrick 7 years earlier. That woman had been grateful for acceptance into the Dunbar family circle. This woman owned her own circle, and she was about to prove it in ways that would shatter every assumption they'd made about her worth and her willingness to fight back. I adjusted my purse, ensuring the envelope containing my monthly income check was easily accessible, and walked through the restaurant doors with absolute confidence in my ability to handle whatever came next. Romano's Italian bistro buzzed with Saturday evening energy as I entered, but my focus was laser-sharp on the corner table where Patrick sat with his parents. They looked exactly as I'd expected, Dorothy in an expensive burgundy dress that commanded attention, Eric in his best suit projecting patriarchal authority, and Patrick nervously checking his watch while adjusting his tie. I spotted Arnold immediately at the bar, positioned perfectly to observe our table while appearing to be just another customer enjoying a drink. Our eyes met briefly, and his slight nod gave me the confidence boost I needed for what was about to unfold. As I approached the table, I noticed the subtle signs of their preparation. Dorothy had chosen the corner table specifically. It offered maximum visibility to other diners while providing a sense of intimacy that would make me feel trapped. Eric sat with his back to the wall, positioned to control the conversation's direction. Patrick fidgeted with a small wrapped box beside his plate, undoubtedly containing the humiliating gift they'd planned. "Happy anniversary, sweetheart," Patrick said as I sat down, his smile not reaching his eyes. The forced cheerfulness in his voice confirmed that he was following a script Dorothy had written. 7 years, Dorothy added with false warmth. "It seems like just yesterday that Patrick brought you home to meet us. Such a sweet girl with such interesting hobbies." The calculated emphasis on hobbies was the first shot across the bow. I smiled pleasantly and thanked them for joining us, playing my part in their charade while mentally reviewing the sequence of evidence I'd prepared to destroy their narrative. The waiter took our drink orders, and I noticed Patrick's increasing nervousness as the evening progressed according to their plan. He kept glancing at his parents for approval, clearly waiting for their signal to begin the intervention they'd orchestrated. Dorothy dominated the early conversation with stories about their recent activities, subtly weaving in comments about real careers and substantial contributions to family life. Each comment was designed to make me feel inadequate, while positioning herself as the voice of wisdom and experience. "Patrick tells us you're still quite dedicated to your computer projects," Eric said during the appetizer course, his tone suggesting mild concern rather than outright dismissal. "We admire your persistence." The word persistence hung in the air like a judgment. In their minds, my continued focus on my business represented stubborn refusal to accept reality rather than professional dedication. I responded with polite acknowledgments, allowing them to build their case while documenting every condescending comment with the recording device Arnold had given me. The more elaborate their setup became, the more devastating my response would be. As we waited for the main course, Patrick's anxiety became increasingly visible. He kept touching the wrapped box, clearly building toward the moment when he would deliver their coordinated humiliation. Dorothy and Eric exchanged meaningful glances, communicating through subtle signals perfected over decades of manipulation. The stage was set exactly as they'd planned. Soon Patrick would stand to make his cruel toast, present his demeaning gift, and expect me to crumble under the weight of public embarrassment and family pressure. They had no idea that I was completely prepared for their attack, armed with evidence that would not only defend against their cruelty, but expose the systematic campaign they'd waged against me. The final act was about to begin, and for the first time in months, I was looking forward to it. The moment arrived with theatrical precision. Patrick's hand trembled slightly as he tapped his knife against his wine glass, the sharp ding cutting through the restaurant's ambient noise, like a bell signaling the start of a boxing match. "I'd like to make a toast," he announced, standing with the rehearsed confidence of someone following a well-practiced script. The surrounding tables turned to watch, exactly as Dorothy had orchestrated. Her eyes gleamed with anticipation, while Eric leaned back with the satisfied expression of a man about to witness justice being served. "To my wife Ella," Patrick continued, his voice gaining strength as he warmed to his performance. 7 years of marriage to a woman who spends her days making little videos and calling it a career. 7 years of supporting someone who thinks playing with a camera is the same as having a real job. A few diners shifted uncomfortably, sensing the cruelty beneath Patrick's words. But he was just getting started. "Here's to facing reality," Patrick declared, reaching for the wrapped box beside his plate. "And to understanding what real contribution to a marriage looks like." He placed the box in front of me with a flourish. "Go ahead, honey, open your anniversary gift." Inside was a nameplate that read Chief Dreamer in mock professional lettering. The insult was clear: while Patrick worked in the real world, I was just a dreamer playing with fantasies. The restaurant fell silent as the cruelty of the moment sank in. This wasn't an anniversary celebration. It was a public execution designed to humiliate me into submission. But instead of the tears or defensive protests they expected, I smiled. "Thank you, Patrick," I said calmly, setting the nameplate aside. "That's actually perfect timing, because I have something for you too." I reached into my purse and withdrew the cream-colored envelope, placing it directly in front of him. "Open it." Patrick's confidence faltered as he fumbled with the envelope's seal. His face went through a series of expressions as he pulled out the bank deposit slip showing my monthly income $47,000. The number was larger than his annual salary. "What is this?" he whispered, his voice hoarse with shock. "That," I said clearly, ensuring everyone in the restaurant could hear, "is my income from last month alone. From those little videos you've been mocking for 7 years." Dorothy leaned forward to look at the paper, and I watched her face drain of color as the implications hit her. "But that's not all," I continued, pulling out my phone and opening the Williams-Sonoma email. "This morning I signed a contract for a 2-year brand partnership worth over $500,000 annually, with a $150,000 signing bonus that I've already deposited into my business account." The silence was deafening. Patrick stared at the numbers as if they might change if he looked hard enough. "You see," I continued, my voice steady and clear, "while you've been calling me worthless and planning this public humiliation, major corporations have been recognizing my work as valuable enough to invest hundreds of thousands of dollars in my success." Eric found his voice first. "This has to be fake. Internet money isn't real money." I smiled and pulled out my tax returns, placing them on the table. "Here are 3 years of legitimate business tax returns, independently verified by my accountant. My business income has exceeded Patrick's salary by significant margins every year of our marriage." Dorothy tried to regain control of the narrative. "Ella, this is hardly appropriate dinner conversation." "No, Dorothy," I interrupted firmly. "What's inappropriate is the systematic campaign you've been running to sabotage my business and isolate me from my professional relationships." I placed printed screenshots of her impersonation emails on the table. "These are emails you sent pretending to be me, designed to damage my brand partnerships. And these," I added, showing her correspondence with my friends and colleagues, "are your attempts to poison my professional and personal relationships by spreading lies about my mental health." Dorothy's mouth opened and closed soundlessly as she recognized her own words staring back at her. "The real question," I continued, "is why a family would spend 2 years trying to destroy something they claimed was worthless. The answer is simple: you knew it wasn't worthless. You knew I was successful, and that success threatened your control over Patrick and your vision of what his wife should be." Arnold appeared beside our table, no longer hiding his presence. "Mrs. Reed, I'm Arnold Stewart, Ella's attorney. I've been documenting this entire conversation, and I should inform you that identity theft, business interference and defamation are serious crimes. Dorothy's face went pale at the sight of her estranged nephew. Arnold, what are you doing here? Supporting someone who refused to be destroyed by this family's manipulation, he replied calmly. Something I wish I'd been strong enough to do years ago. Patrick finally found his voice, though it came out as a croak. But you're supposed to need me. You're supposed to depend on my support. I looked at my husband, really looked at him, and felt only pity. Patrick, I've been financially supporting this marriage for years, while you took credit for our lifestyle. The kitchen renovation you bragged about to your friends, I paid for it. The vacation to Hawaii you claimed you provided, my income funded it. Even your car insurance, I've been covering it without asking for recognition, because I thought we were partners. The truth hung in the air like a physical weight. Patrick slumped in his chair, as the foundation of his identity as provider and head of household crumbled before his eyes. So here's what's going to happen, I continued, standing and addressing the entire table. I'm using my monthly income, the money from my worthless hobby, to retain the best divorce attorney in the city. I have documentation of your conspiracy, evidence of financial manipulation, and proof of systematic sabotage that will support both divorce proceedings and civil lawsuits. I looked directly at Dorothy. You wanted to discuss realistic expectations and contributions to the household? Let's be realistic. I make more money than your son ever will. I've built a business that major corporations value, and I no longer need anyone's approval to live my life. The restaurant remained frozen in stunned silence as I gathered my purse and stood to leave. Patrick, you'll be hearing from my attorney. Dorothy, you'll be hearing from law enforcement about the identity theft and business interference charges. Eric, you might want to review your insurance agency's computer usage policies, since some of this sabotage was conducted using company resources. I paused at the edge of the table for one final observation. You called me worthless tonight, but the only thing worthless here was 7 years spent trying to please people who saw my success as a threat, rather than an achievement. As I walked toward the exit with Arnold beside me, I heard the crash of Patrick's fist hitting the table and Dorothy's harsh whispers, trying to maintain some semblance of control over a situation that had spiraled completely beyond their influence. Outside, the evening air felt crisp and clean. Arnold smiled as we walked away from the restaurant, where my old life had finally definitively ended. How do you feel? He asked. I considered the question carefully. Free, I said finally. For the first time in years, completely free. Behind us, the restaurant door remained closed. The Dunbar family was undoubtedly still sitting at that corner table, trying to process how their carefully planned intervention had become their public exposure as manipulative, controlling people who couldn't tolerate anyone else's success. Tomorrow I would begin the legal proceedings to end my marriage and hold them accountable for their actions. But tonight, I was simply a successful woman who had refused to accept less than she deserved, and proven that sometimes, the best revenge is letting the truth speak for itself. The envelope that had contained my monthly income check was now empty, but it had served its purpose. It had shown everyone in that restaurant, including me, exactly what worthless looked like when it had a net worth they couldn't ignore. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.